One of the senators before whom Ambassador Lighthizer appeared, Senator Rob Portman, a Republican from Ohio, who also is a former trade representative himself, and he comes to us from Capitol Hill. So, Senator, thanks for being back with us. Really appreciate it.
Good morning, David. Thanks for having me on again.
As I say, you were there talking with Robert Lighthizer, and how did you take what he had to say? Because the markets are trying to figure out, are we there yet? What our kids ask us from the backseat of the car, are we there yet on the China trade deal? What would you say to the markets?
Well, probably the same thing I said to my kids when they always ask that, which is, just relax. No, I think we are in a pretty good position right now. I think we've made progress on a number of fronts. One is addressing the trade imbalance itself. And as you know, after the last meeting, there was talk about China buying additional soybeans, LNG, other products, so that there'd be more exports, which helps with the imbalance in trade. But second, and maybe most importantly, talk about the IP issue, which is really how this all started. The Section 301 case is about intellectual property and about the fact that the Chinese have required joint ventures, licensing agreements, and in other ways are stealing intellectual property, which is contrary to global rules and something that needs to be addressed. And by the way, many countries around the trading countries with China and us agree with that. So whether it's Japan or whether it's the EU and others. So I think he's making progress there. And then third is the subsidies issues. That may in the end be the toughest one. This is the state-owned enterprises and other ways in which the Chinese government subsidizes their production or even their exports directly. But I think he's making progress. And look, he's a tough negotiator. So of course yesterday he said, we're keeping very much this option open of increasing the tariffs. We had an extension on March 1st, but it doesn't mean that we will continue to do that. So I think that the Chinese government realizes that. I think they know that they have to come through with something that's more equitable, more fair, has more reciprocity than the current relationship.
And the Chinese have tended to be tough negotiators in their own way as well. I know you're meeting with the president this afternoon on the subject of trade. Do you have any indications at this point? Do you think the president has any indications that, in fact, the Chinese might be willing to make substantive changes on things like intellectual property and the subsidies issues that, as you say, are really the tough ones?
Yeah, I don't think Lighthizer will close the deal without that. And again, good news already on them buying more of our exports, which is important. The trade imbalance is, over $300 billion annually. But on those other issues, also some relatively good reports from the meetings that took place in Washington the week before last. So my sense is the next meeting will be with the two presidents. It'll be kicked up a level, and that they won't meet unless there is something positive to report. So I think that's what's to watch for is, when does that meeting get scheduled? I did press Bob Lighthizer a little bit on timing yesterday because I do think that there needs to be a sense of urgency on the part of the Chinese government to come to an agreement here. And I think deadlines sometimes are helpful in that regard.
So I also want to just touch on the USMCA, the successor to NAFTA, where that stands, because we tend to ignore that because China really soaks up all the attention. But a lot of people are very concerned, particularly in the business world, about what happens with that deal.
Well, I think it's an agreement that is an improvement over the existing NAFTA in every respect for Democrats, and that's why I think at the end of the day, I think it likely passes. Republicans broadly support it, including me. We need to have a North American trade agreement. But for Democrats, when you look at the changes in the agreement relative to the existing NAFTA agreement, it's positive. There are new environmental standards. There are labor standards for the first time. There are changes, again, to intellectual property protection and other things that I think lead in the end to this inescapable reality that this is a lot better than the status quo. So my hope is that we get this done. It probably won't get done until we also resolve the 232 issue, which is the aluminum and steel tariffs that are still in place with regard to Canada and Mexico. We need to negotiate something there. My hope is that in a meeting with the president today, we can talk more about that. My sense is that the Canadians and the Mexicans are going to have a very difficult time ratifying the agreement themselves unless we resolve that issue.
And finally, Senator, give us just a thought or two on the budget. We now have a budget request set coming from the administration. We talked with Chairman Yarmouth of the House Budget Committee yesterday on this, and he said it's an aggressive ask from the administration. As a practical matter, probably the Senate and you in particular will have an important role in deciding where that ends up. What do you like? What do you not like?
Well, as usual, budgets are a blueprint and in some respects a message from the administration. And I also used to put together budgets, as you know, David, and sometimes that was frustrating as a budget director not to have the Congress say, we're going to, embrace every aspect of your budget. So there are good parts and bad parts as I see it. One good part is there is some spending restraint that's necessary. But they also funded some interesting programs. One is called the Jobs Act. It's a legislation that Senator Tim Kaine and I have introduced the last couple of Congresses. It's bipartisan. It's very simple. It says we should allow Pell Grants to be used for short-term training programs, which is so needed right now for our young people who need those skills to be able to get a job, and certainly for our employers who are desperate for qualified workers. So that's an interesting, innovative program, an example of what's good in there. Other things in there I don't like so much, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, which has helped to reduce the pollution and the harmful algal blooms and the invasive species on Lake Erie, and it's been very effective. Public-private partnership is practically zeroed out, a 90% cut. That's not smart because that program's working. So, you know, you pick and choose, I suppose, and at the end of the day, of course, Congress will write the budget.
Right, and Great Lakes, very important to your home state of Ohio and my home state of Michigan. So we're concerned about those Great Lakes and keeping it healthy. Okay, thank you so much, Senator. Really good to have you
Thanks,
with us
David.
today. That's Republican Senator Rob Portman of Ohio.